Hi students, welcome to week 2 of Organizational Behavior. This week we're in chapter 2 of our course text on small group interactions. This week we have a number of learning objectives. First, we're going to learn about the 4 internal influences of the Tubbs model: communication, language behavior, self-disclosure, and interaction roles. And second, we're going to continue to the discussion about the systems theory behind the Tubbs model. Third, we're going to spend time studying communication between members who are in small groups. And then finally, we're going to look at some ethical considerations. Let's take a little bit deeper dive for just a moment about some of these topics. Group communications is different than normal one-on-one individual communication. On page 46 of our text, Tubbs describes group communication as a process of creating meanings in the minds of others. These meanings, Tubbs says, may or may not correspond to the meanings that we intend to create. Not communicating the intended meaning of our words is certainly a problem that we have in one-on-one communication as well. What makes communication that much more difficult, however, are the numerous variables that we sometimes don't think about. Those variables include different expectations amongst members of the same group, different authority levels between members of the same group, and even cultural differences between members of the same group. And all of these variables amp up the complexity between members. I want to spend a moment reviewing the language discussion in the course text. Tubbs spends a lot of time going through all of the faux pas of our gestures, phrases, and uses of symbols. Language and communication is very complex and should not be underestimated in small groups. One of the more interesting parts of the discussion relates to phrases that kill ideas and phrases that ignite ideas. Look on page 81 in the text for a complete list. But here are a few idea killers, and I have to admit I've probably used some of these before. For example, that's crazy. It's not practical. We're too small for that. And my favorite that we've all heard or probably even used before is, that will never work. Now listen, if you find yourself often using those words, stop, count to 10, and think before you really say them. In contrast, try some of these igniter phrases. That's good. You're on the right track. We're going to try something different. And one that almost always works when you're trying to get things going in the right direction is, why don't we assume that would work, and then we'll go from there. Listen, you get the idea. Avoid those idea killers and start using the igniter phrases more. I'd also like to say that when you're using those igniter phrases, you have to be genuine. I'm not suggesting, and nor is the author of the text, that we do not express our opinions. But sometimes we have to check our opinions before expressing them verbally. And we have to always be careful to not let the group go down the wrong path just because we don't want to be called an idea killer. Using our words to help steer the group takes great discernment and courage. Let God provide you wisdom on when and what to say to others in a group. When we talk about communication small group discussions, 2 things I encourage you to do some extra study on right from the course text. And the first is the Johari window. It's discussed on pages 84 and 85. The Johari window is a recognized tool to help us figure out when to disclose information in a small group setting. The whole chapter on self-disclosure is filled with some good, practical advice. And the second thing I encourage you to do, I'd like you to read about the story from Senator John McCain. It's a story about his time in captivity as a POW. And many of you are from Arizona and likely already know the senator's story. But take time to read his story through the lens of a small group dynamics. Small group communication takes on a whole new look in his POW account. And finally, just a closing thought about the discussion of ethics from this chapter. In any course text, we need to be careful with the discussion about ethics. In this course, the connection between ethics and small groups is one of culture. Each small group has its own subculture, and it may be quite different than the larger corporate culture in which the small group exists. Within this small group's subculture is the notion of what is the right thing to do. It's one of the foundational ethical questions that always needs to be answered. So, whatever small group or groups that you exist in, remember that your group has a responsibility to always do the right thing. Now, Chapter 2 describes 4 different ethical models to help small groups figure out that right thing to do. Read those models, all right? But, and I emphasize but here, do not think that just because those models are in a college text that they represent truth. I would challenge you to read those models of ethics and then compare them to God's Word. Do not simply accept those models as truth if they do not line up with the Bible. And I'll give you a hint. They are marginal at best, in my view, in lining up with God's definition of ethics, especially if you use Matthew chapter 22, this is verses 34 to 40 as your comparison. But now listen, you'll need to do some study on this yourself. Okay, that's it for now. Please thoroughly read chapter 2 to understand the details of what I'm talking about. Don't forget the script for this video is included in the module if you want to reference the written version. As usual, I'll be available during virtual office hours on Tuesday evening. Contact me with questions anytime though throughout the week. All right? Remember, God is on his throne. He's always been here, and he always will be. Have a great day.